I loved woodworking, and then it was when I had come to Toronto, and I was in the Toronto Folklore Centre. It no longer exists, but for many decades it was the instrument shop and lessons, and it was a hub of many things. And in the way that the Ottawa Folklore Centre still is in Ottawa. And I saw a John Larrivee guitar. And this was early on. John had only been building maybe a few years. He was still working in his basement. And to this day, I remember holding the guitar, looking at the neck. Well, here's a rough neck, right? And I was looking where this veneer of wood is joined to the mahogany of the neck. You know, and there's two pieces of wood here, right? And I can remember staring at it and thinking, I can see where one wood ends and the next one begins, but I don't see any glue in between there. How do you do that? How is that accomplished? How could that possibly happen? And I remember staring at it, and that stayed with me. And then I ran into John showing his wares at the Mariposa Festival. There's folk music coming back into it, in the craft section. This was his first time there when Mariposa was on the island, the Toronto Islands, earlier years. And this would have been 71. And I ran into John, and this was 2 months after that epiphanal moment, or awareness moment, whatever you want to call it. And that made me think, gee, guitars are actually made by somebody with hands. They're actually just made. They aren't assembled by machines in a factory. It was the first moment I took a moment to think about it. So I then got interested, and I'm jumping around here. So this is in the period before I ran into John and saw one of his guitars was 2 months. And there was a publication that had an article about a studio in Vancouver where they were making instruments. A bunch of makers got together and had a little collective. They were mostly doing early instruments, lutes and harpsichords and things like that, but some guitars. And the naive teenager, I thought, you know what? I'm going to hitchhike out west and knock on their door and go work with them. Like that would have happened, right? Maybe it would have, I don't know. It was the times, right? So in between the time when I saw John's guitar, had that thought, I run into John. And here's this hairy, and I had hair in those days, and it was all over the place and scruffy. And I said, could I come and work with you? And he said, well, I'm going to start up in the fall. These were in the days before climate control, when a chunk of the humid summer he couldn't build guitars. And he said, sure, come on by and we'll give it a try. It was that easy. What I didn't know was there was something going on in the background, and that I just happened to stumble on. The children's performer, Eric Nagler, was the owner at that time of the Folklore Centre. He was the one who started it. He sold it to some other people, including Bill Garrett. But at the time he was running it, he was talking John into becoming a guitar factory. Something that he is now, but at the time he was just building classical guitars by himself. That's all he knew. And he was pushing John to do this. So John thought, okay, I'll get some other people, I'll figure it out. Well, I happened to be in front of his face right at that time. So he figured there's somebody else. I'll get him in and I'll train him and he'll work for me. It turned out after 3 months, John wasn't ready, didn't know how to do it, didn't know what he was doing. I saw him string up his first steel string. It was too soon. So he ended up getting rid of everybody else who was there. It was only a couple other people. And it was just he and I for 2 years. But it was that background push that opened this little window of opportunity, and I happened to ask him at that moment. If it wasn't for that, who knows if it would have happened. Talk about luck. I think if John Larrivee walked into my shop today, he would feel nostalgic because he would see things from the way, versions of the way he used to do it. Whereas now it's CNC machines and hundreds of people and whatever, But I'm a solo builder, so I do everything myself, and I'm jigged up for something for a single human to do it. I'm thankful. So I think about him frequently because he gave me my life, and amongst people who also learned from him. whether it's Linda Manzer or Dave Wren or other builders who in subsequent times, but roughly the same era, you know, studied with him, and we're all connected and friends, and we help each other and support each other. I mean, just moving into this shop, Dave Wren and Linda Manzer and Sergei de Young came and helped me move my stuff in. And the shop I had before this, when John was still in Toronto, he and Dave Wren came up, and the three of us wired it one day. He just took a day off of his work and came up and helped me wire my shop. I mean, he was generous. Yes, you're technically competing with each other, but no two makers produce guitars that sound the same or feel exactly the same, and no two guitar players are after the same thing. What you hear is determined so much by your physiology, your psychology, your history, what you want. So there's room for everybody, really, and we understand that at a visceral level. So, and you know, nobody's getting rich in the arts like this, you know, in the crafts. So it's not going to hurt you to help your friends. And one other aspect that I suspect maybe other makers feel, but I do personally, because I learned by apprenticeship, and you learn so much more that way. You learn patience. You learn that to do this job well takes 2 days. But if you don't know that, you're working on your own, and after 4 hours, you're thinking, I have been at this since 1 o'clock, and it's still crappy. I'm terrible. I can't do this. You don't realize that a professional, you know, takes 16 hours to do that well. You learn things like that by apprenticing. And since I'm not taking people on in my own shop for all kinds of personal reasons, I'm happy to help them. I do some teaching outside the shop, but if somebody who's learning calls me, or nowadays emails me, I will respond as quickly as I can. If I'm in the middle of work and they phone me, you know, I'm trying to get the dovetail working on this guitar and I don't know what happened, it's now leaning to the left and I can't figure out why because my jigs and what, you know, and I'll be their doctor. I'll calm them down, you know, and I'll lie them on the couch and I'll talk them through, okay, what did you do? Describe to me the jig. Ah, you know, here's what happened. You should have set your tool at this, whatever it might be. And I will talk them through how to solve it, and I have made a personal vow to respond to anybody. My wife, Judith, turned me on to a book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards, a classic and utterly brilliant. And I mean, I don't want to waste time talking about how she was struggling in her art classes of giving instructions to students, and somehow there was a barrier from receiving the verbal instruction, but they weren't able to translate it into an accomplishment. And what was blocking? What was going on in the brain and in cognitive processes? And so she started doing some research on the brain. This was decades ago, still early days, where people were starting to understand the difference between the right and left hemispheres. So she started applying it to her classes, and there was this breakthrough of people who said, I can't draw. My wife made me come to this class, or whatever it might be. And, you know, people would be drawing something that still looked like they were in grade 3. And she would get them drawing because of understanding what's going on in the hemispheres. And she came up with exercises to trick the left hemisphere to get out of the way. That's your analytical side. To get the more free-thinking side, intuitive side of the brain in the mode, which is what creative people have happening naturally. And I worked my way through about half the exercises in that book. And boy, that set me on a path. And now I see things more consciously, the way an artist looks at something. They look at an eye, like I'm staring at your eye right now, and I don't see this oval shape. I don't see an eye. I see a line, and I see another line, and I see a line where the space opens up, and I see a relationship of the distance here, and I see the shape that's created when this line comes here, and I see the shadow, and I see that it's sort of a triangular shape, and the relationship of the shadows and the lines to each other. I don't see eye anymore. And when I teach engraving and inlay, I do a couple of those exercises and break people out so that they can't look at anything. An animal, an apple, a human, they stare at the news and they now see crease lines and faces and shapes and shadows and the top lips in shadow if the light's above here, you know, and all this stuff that they never noticed before. And I said, now don't do this to people on the subway. You know, don't stare at them intently or, you know, someone will hit you, right? At minimal, right? But it's a way of looking at things that good artists have intuitively, or that's how their brains were wired up when they came out of the womb. Well, the first stage of doing any inlay is the drawing, is the sketch. And right now there's a sketch here on tracing paper. From this, I move to selecting the materials I'm going to build with and photocopying my drawing and literally gluing the paper photocopies onto the various elements of the materials I'm going to use, the shell, the stone, the legal ivories, the metals. Then I cut it and then it's inlaid into the guitar.
So over here you have an example of some recent drawings that you've done.
Yes, this is various Hawaiian island sea creatures. Dolphins, turtles, whales, fish, the coral. Be a bit hard to see. I'm drawn on a very rare kind of tracing paper, so the lines are a bit shiny.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier it's dentist paper.
Yes, a special kind of tracing paper called cephalometric. Sorry, I had to get the name. Cephalometric tracing paper. Look at how thin that is. See, you can see my nose right through there.
All right, so that then becomes, what's the next phase after once you've done the drawing?
Then I have glued photocopies of the drawing right onto the stone, the shell, the thin pieces that I then cut with a handsaw. And when they're all cut, they are then inset into the wood on a guitar's neck. It's not like veneering or marquetry, which is veneer placed on the surface. This is actually inlaid. It's inset into the instrument. Then sanded flush to the surface. Then I engrave the details. Now I'll show you something. Here is a portion of an inlay on a peace theme where we have two well-known people in my hand actually holding the peace sign. You see that as the outline. But Mandela and the Dalai Lama are pictured here. And then there's more inlay that will happen down the neck, which is covered in tape right now from the finishing process. I will say this is all stone and shell and a bit of metal in the glasses that you're seeing here. And then engraved. The engraving cuts are filled in with a compound. There's a little bit of brushwork here, catching some shading. And then I'll show you the stage that the rest of it is at. If you can bring the camera down to the workbench here, you are seeing what's going to be on the fingerboard. And what you're looking at, you're seeing it's all white, and that's paper glued to the surface. And that's John Lennon, who will show up in the middle behind one of these signs with a line from his song, "All we are saying is give peace a chance." And that's the way it's resting here. As I cut the pieces out, I laid them on this tape, that sticky side up, to hold it in place. I never tire of saying this, that no matter how stunning the inlay, how amazing the woods, how perfect the joinery, if it doesn't sound good and play well, it's a complete failure. And you might as well just put a plant in the sound hole. That's all it is. It's a tool first and foremost, a tool for music, for someone else's creative impulses. What I find then, doing the inlay work I do, that's my art form, that's just satisfying my own creative pursuits. And the guitar is my canvas. I don't want to be in the art world, per se. I want to be in the music world, making guitars. So the neck has become my canvas. And for me and for my customers, it's an additional layer of creativity, of art that's very personal for them. So there's all this connection they have to the instrument and all on top of all the other customized features. So if it's an excellent instrument as a tool, and it also has art on it, it becomes this multi-layered creative thing. It's very satisfying for me. I am so spoiled. I'm given the chance. I'm paid to have fun, you know? And then the players get this thing that's multi-layered and they feel so much more connected to it. But I'm delighted when players like James Keelaghan say they just love their old guitar and they tour with it all the time. And yes, if you look at it, it's beaten up, it's chewed up, it's scratched, but the essence of it is structurally where it should be, and he loves the sound. I adore hearing my guitars played, you know.